Chris Lighty was pronounced dead at 44 years old back on August 30th, 2012. Gunshot to the head.
And they went inside and they brought them black bags with them, them body bags, and that's when it got real. When they came out the basement with the bags and his body was in the bags, that's when you knew Chris was never coming back.
I honestly can't wrap my head around the idea of him shooting himself. You know, so I mean, I don't have all the information, so I don't point or say anything other than what's being said publicly.
Right.
But I don't believe that.
He turned a Bronx kid's hustle into hip-hop's first $100 million handshake, brokered deals that made rappers richer than their own record labels, and sat at tables where black men weren't supposed to have seats. Chris Lighty wasn't just a manager. He was the blueprint, the bridge between the streets and the boardroom, the man who proved that the real money wasn't in the music, it was in the brand. In 2007, when Coca-Cola bought Glaceau for over $4 billion, 50 Cent walked away with $100 million, and Lighty's name became legend. He'd done it, turned vitamin water into hip-hop's greatest payday, all because he believed in equity over advances, ownership over hype.
My sources confirmed to me that at the request of Chris Lighty's grieving mother, superstar artist 50 Cent has brought in a high-powered team to investigate the hip-hop mogul's death. This comes as Fox 5 News has obtained a copy of his will, and it leaves everything to his wife.
But 5 years later, on a humid August morning in 2012, Chris Lighty was found dead in his Bronx apartment. A 9mm by his side, the official ruling, suicide. No note, no warning, just whispers of IRS debt, a crumbling marriage, and questions that still won't quiet. His clients mourned, the industry shook, and 50 Cent hired private investigators because something didn't sit right. This is the story of the man who built empires for everyone but himself, and the shot that left more questions than answers.
She mentioned at one point she had gotten a job offer from Chris Lighty, and then like the day before she was about to start, day of, he died.
Before the empires, before the $100 million handshakes and the headlines, there was just a Bronx kid named Daryl Stephen Lighty, born in May of 1968, into a world where survival meant staying sharp and opportunity meant creating your own lane. The Bronx in the 80s wasn't just a place. It was a proving ground where hip-hop was being born in basement parties and park jams, where DJs were gods and the music pulsing through those streets felt like revolution. Chris wasn't born into wealth or connections, but he had something just as valuable: hustle, and the kind of vision that let him see what others missed. While other kids were chasing quick money or dead-end dreams, teenage Chris was hauling heavy vinyl crates for DJ Red Alert, sweating through summer block parties, watching how the game moved, who held power, and how respect was earned one spin at a time. He wasn't just carrying records, he was carrying ambition, absorbing every conversation, every deal whispered between sets, every moment when a hot track could change someone's life overnight. By 1988, that hustle paid off in a way most Bronx kids could only dream about. Russell Simmons, the architect of Def Jam and Rush Artist Management, hired 20-year-old Chris Lighty to work inside the machine. Suddenly, he wasn't on the outside looking in. He was managing Will Smith, Rakim, LL Cool J, learning how contracts worked, how radio got played, how white executives underestimated black talent until the numbers proved them wrong every single time. Chris watched Russell build an empire, but he also watched the cracks, the way artists got played, the way even legends could end up broke while labels got rich. He absorbed it all: the wins, the losses, the politics, the power moves, and somewhere in those Rush management offices, surrounded by chaos and genius, Chris Lighty started building a blueprint of his own, not just for managing artists, but for protecting them, for making sure the culture that built hip-hop could actually build wealth too. By 1996, Chris Lighty had learned the rules of the game, but he was ready to rewrite them entirely. That same year, Chris Lighty and his partner, Mona Scott Young, walked into a room full of possibility and came out with something the industry had never seen before. Violator Management, a company named after the Bronx street crew Chris ran with, a badge of pride that said, "We're taking our power with us." This wasn't just another management firm trying to play nice with the establishment. This was a declaration, a promise that the streets could own the boardroom too. The launch party felt like prophecy. Dim-lit New York club packed wall to wall with the culture's finest. Busta Rhymes holding court in one corner, a tribe called Quest chopping it up in another. The air thick with smoke and ambition, and the unshakable feeling that something was shifting. Chris moved through that room like he'd already won, dapping up artists who trusted him to do what the labels wouldn't: protect them, build them, turn their talent into generational wealth. And he delivered, fast. By 1997, Chris had brokered something nobody thought was possible. LL Cool J standing in front of cameras for a Gap commercial, the first time a rapper had crossed over into mainstream retail advertising like that. It wasn't just about the check, though the check was good. It was about proving that black artists, hip-hop artists, could sell to middle America without compromising who they were. The industry took notice, and suddenly Chris Lighty's phone wouldn't stop ringing. He stacked wins like he was building a fortress. Sprite deals for a tribe called Quest, AT&T campaigns, Mountain Dew endorsements for Busta Rhymes. Every contract another brick in the foundation. Chris understood something the old guard didn't. Hip-hop wasn't a fad. It was culture, and culture moves product better than any jingle ever could. He became the bridge, the translator, the man who could sit across from corporate executives in suits and make them understand that investing in his artists wasn't charity. It was smart business. By 1999, Violator wasn't just managing artists anymore. They were producing music too, dropping Violator, the album with Q-Tip's Vivrant Thing, climbing into the top 10 on the R&B and hip-hop charts. The compilation was proof of concept, a showcase of the roster Chris had assembled, and the world was paying attention. He'd gone from carrying crates to commanding rooms, from watching Russell Simmons build an empire to building one of his own, brick by brick, deal by deal, artist by artist. Chris Lighty had arrived, and hip-hop had a new architect, one who believed the real wealth wasn't in the music itself, but in everything the music could unlock. In 2004, Chris Lighty walked 50 Cent through the doors of Glaceau headquarters in Queens, just blocks from where Curtis Jackson grew up, slinging on street corners, and brokered a deal that would rewrite the entire playbook for hip-hop wealth. This wasn't about a sneaker endorsement or a one-time commercial check. This was equity, ownership, a $5 million fee upfront, plus a stake in Vitamin Water itself. Most managers would have pushed 50 to take the guaranteed money and run, but Chris saw something bigger, something the industry had trained black artists to never expect: a seat at the table when the real money got divided. 3 years later, when Coca-Cola acquired Glaceau for over $4 billion, 50 Cent walked away with $100 million, the largest endorsement payout in hip-hop history, and Chris Lighty's legend went nuclear. He'd proven what he'd been preaching all along, that the real generational wealth wasn't in album sales or tour dates. It was in brand equity, in making corporations pay for access to the culture. Every manager, every artist, every label exec suddenly wanted to know how Chris did it, wanted him to work that same magic for their roster. And Chris was everywhere, juggling empires like it was nothing, managing Diddy through his peak, navigating Mariah Carey's comeback, keeping Busta Rhymes fed with Mountain Dew money and arena tours. His phone never quiet, his calendar never empty. In 2003, he'd even taken a position as senior vice president at Jive Records, signing Mobb Deep and proving he could operate on both sides of the table without losing his edge. By 2007, he co-founded Brand Asset Group, with Warner Music, legitimizing the entire concept of artist branding as its own industry. The money was good, the power was intoxicating, and Chris Lighty had become the most important person nobody outside hip-hop had ever heard of. The man who could turn a street rapper into a corporate brand, the bridge between the culture and the billions. He moved through boardrooms and VIP sections with equal ease, translating slang into shareholder language, making white executives feel comfortable enough to write checks they'd never imagined writing for black men. But power like that comes with a price most people don't see until it's too late. The late-night calls from artists in crisis, the egos that needed managing as much as the money, the weight of being indispensable to so many people that your own life starts to disappear beneath everyone else's needs. Chris was building empires for 50 Cent, for Diddy, for Busta, for Mariah. But somewhere in all that success, the cracks were already forming. By 2011, the empire Chris built was still standing, still profitable, still powerful, but it wasn't his anymore, not entirely. That September, Violator Management merged with Primary Wave Music Publishing, rebranding as Primary Violator. And while the press releases celebrated expansion and opportunity, the truth was quieter and more complicated. Chris went from owner to chief operating officer, still respected, still essential, but no longer the final word on every decision. He was signing papers in sleek offices that felt more corporate than culture, his phone buzzing with artist crises while board members talked quarterly projections and shareholder value. The roster was still stacked, Diddy, Mariah, Busta, but managing egos that big had always been exhausting, and now Chris was caught in a crossfire he couldn't control. The beef between Diddy and 50 Cent had been simmering for years, two titans of hip-hop who couldn't occupy the same space without tension crackling through the air. Chris managed both, which meant every shot fired in interviews or on records put him in an impossible position. Loyalty divided, allegiances questioned, phone calls he couldn't ignore from men who both expected him to choose their side. 50 Cent would later tell a story about Chris's wedding, how Diddy approached him talking about wanting to take him shopping, the kind of loaded comment that in hip-hop parlance could mean a dozen different things, none of them innocent. But the real weight-crushing Chris wasn't about managing feuds or corporate restructuring. It was about money, or the lack of it. The IRS had come calling, and the numbers were brutal. Over $300,000 in back taxes, some reports claiming the debt climbed closer to $5 million. In April 2012, City National Bank filed a lawsuit over a $53,000 overdraft, the kind of financial chaos that didn't make sense for a man who'd brokered $100 million deals. But that's the cruel irony of the industry. You can make everyone else rich and still end up drowning in your own debt. His marriage to Veronica was fracturing too, divorce proceedings adding emotional wreckage to the financial collapse, the kind of private pain that no amount of boardroom success could heal. Chris was still showing up, still making calls, still putting out fires for artists who needed him, but the man who'd built empires for everyone else was watching his own foundation crumble. August 30th, 2012 started like too many mornings had that summer. Tense, heavy, the kind of day where even the air in the Bronx apartment felt like it was holding its breath. Chris and Veronica were in the middle of it all. Divorce papers, financial wreckage, a U-Haul truck parked outside, waiting to split a life into boxes and separate addresses. There was an argument that morning, the kind that happens when love has curdled into legal proceedings, and every conversation is about what's owed and what's lost. The kids were sent away, spared from witnessing whatever came next. What happened after has been reported a dozen different ways, but the facts are cold and official. Chris Lighty stepped out onto the patio alone, and a single gunshot shattered the morning. When police arrived, they found him unresponsive, a 9mm handgun nearby, no signs of forced entry, no note left behind to explain the why. Within 7 hours, The New York Police Department and medical examiner ruled it an apparent suicide. And just like that, the man who'd built empires for hip-hop's biggest names was gone at 44 years old. But even in those first hours, the story felt incomplete, contested, heavy with questions nobody wanted to ask out loud. A friend of Veronica's pushed back against the narrative almost immediately, telling TV One that Chris and his wife didn't get into a fight that day, that the real weight crushing him was financial difficulties, debts that had piled up beyond what anyone outside the situation could see. It was a subtle correction, an attempt to shift the story away from a domestic dispute trigger towards something deeper, more systemic, the kind of pressure that builds slowly until it breaks you. The news hit hip-hop like a freight train. BBC reported it first, then the New York Post, then every outlet that had ever covered the culture. Hip-hop mogul Chris Lighty found dead in apparent suicide. The tributes poured in fast. Busta Rhymes mourning publicly. Russell Simmons releasing statements about a man who'd learned the game under his wing and exceeded every expectation. But it was 50 Cent's reaction that cut the deepest, his voice cracking with confusion when he told HuffPost Live, "I still can't make very much sense of it." For a man who'd made $50 to $100 million, who'd brokered the biggest deal in hip-hop history, the loss felt personal, unfinished, wrong. 50 Cent wasn't the type to let things sit unanswered, especially when the math didn't add up. Within weeks of Chris Lighty's death, after his mother reached out pleading for clarity, Curtis Jackson hired private investigator Les Levine and assembled a team to dig into what the NYPD had closed in 7 hours. The ruling was clean on paper: apparent suicide, weapon recovered, no forced entry. But for people who'd spent decades watching Chris navigate impossible situations, the speed of that conclusion felt wrong, rushed, incomplete. The investigators raised questions that wouldn't quiet. Why was there no gunshot residue test conducted? Why wasn't DNA analysis performed on the weapon? Why was a man with everything to live for, clients who depended on him, deals in motion, a legacy still being built, declared a suicide case before the sun set on the same day? These weren't conspiracy theories from internet forums. These were procedural gaps that even law enforcement protocols should have demanded. But nature abhors a vacuum, and where official answers stop, speculation rushes in to fill the silence. Online, the rumors started small and then spread like wildfire through hip-hop communities, hungry for something that made sense of the senseless. Some pointed to the Diddy and 50 Cent beef, the way Chris had been caught managing both titans during their most volatile years, suggesting maybe someone wanted him silenced before he could talk. Others whispered about Kim Porter, about overlapping circles and dangerous secrets, theories that had no evidence but fed on the unease everyone felt. By 2025, when Diddy's own legal troubles exploded into federal trials, Chris Lighty's name resurfaced in testimony. Mentions of how he'd managed both men during their feud, how he'd been the bridge between empires that wanted each other destroyed. Suddenly, 13 years after his death, a new generation of YouTube documentarians and conspiracy theorists were digging through his story, convinced there was more to uncover. But here's the truth that matters. None of those theories have evidence. None of those whispers have been proven, and repeating them doesn't honor Chris's memory. It just turns tragedy into entertainment. What we know for certain is that a man who built fortunes for others died under financial and personal strain, and the system closed his case before anyone who loved him could exhale. What Chris Lighty left behind wasn't just grief, it was a blueprint that transformed the entire industry. Proof carved into every equity deal and brand partnership that followed. In 2022, 10 years after his death, Fat Joe stood in front of cameras at the Hip Hop Museum, hosting a film tribute dedicated to Chris's legacy. The room packed with artists and executives who owed their wealth to lessons Chris taught, deals he pioneered, moves he made when nobody believed hip-hop could command that kind of respect. The tribute wasn't charity. It was acknowledgement that the game had changed because one Bronx kid refused to let the culture stay broke. By 2025, a new generation was discovering Chris's story through YouTube documentaries. Channels like Celebrity Underrated and Legends Underrated, piecing together his rise and tragic fall. Some digging for conspiracy theories. Others simply trying to understand how someone so essential could be so overlooked. The algorithm kept serving his name to viewers hungry for forgotten hip-hop history. And suddenly, teenagers who'd never heard of Violator management were learning that the vitamin water model, equity over endorsements, ownership over one-time checks, came from a man who died before he could fully enjoy the revolution he started. Primary Violator continued operating under the primary wave structure. The machinery Chris helped build, still turning, still managing careers, still brokering deals, but without the architect who understood that every contract was about more than money. It was about protecting the culture from being exploited the way previous generations had been. Artists like 50 Cent still credit Chris's vision every time they talk about business, still reference that vitamin water deal as the moment hip-hop learned to demand real ownership. And Mona Scott Young, Chris's original partner, built her own empire in reality television, proving that the Violator ethos, protect your artists, maximize their value, never settle for less, could translate across mediums. Today, when Jay-Z structures a deal through Roc Nation, when any artist demands equity instead of an endorsement check, when managers negotiate brand partnerships that turn rappers into moguls, they're walking a path Chris Lighty paved with his own hands. The vitamin water model became the industry standard. Ownership over hype, long-term wealth over quick cash. And every time a hip-hop artist sits at a corporate table expecting to be treated like a partner instead of a product, that's Chris's legacy breathing. The Violator catalog still moves, still gets streamed, still reminds people that before there was a formula for artist branding, there was a Bronx kid who believed the culture deserved more than crumbs from the table. Modern moguls study his deals the way business schools study case studies, parsing how he turned street credibility into corporate millions without compromising the art or the artist. But his story also carries a warning that the industry still refuses to hear. You can build empires for everyone else and still collapse under weight no one sees. The same system that celebrates black excellence rarely protects black men when the pressure becomes unbearable, when the debts pile up, when the phone calls never stop and the silence feels impossible. Chris's death, whether by his own hand or something darker, we'll never fully know, sits in that painful space where triumph and tragedy refuse to separate, where a $100 million deal and a $300,000 IRS debt can coexist in the same man's life. The questions around August 30th, 2012 may never be fully answered, but what remains undeniable is this. Chris Lighty changed hip-hop business forever, proving that the kid carrying crates could grow up to command boardrooms. That ownership wasn't just for the suits, that our culture could build generational wealth if someone brave enough was willing to fight for it. Chris Lighty proved you could turn a Bronx hustle into boardroom billions, but his silence that August morning reminds us that even the strongest bridges can collapse under weight no one else sees.